Alrighty, here we go.
Okay.
All right. So, 1 Samuel chapter 3, number 1. What does this verse mean? And the word of the Lord was rare in those days. And why would that be? So we'll start, Bonnie, we'll start with you.
Okay, the word of the Lord was precious. God was not speaking to the people through his prophets in sweeping revelations at that time. He was relatively quiet.
Exactly. And why do you suppose he was relatively quiet? We talked just a little bit briefly about that. We're gonna do a lot more study into it, but why was he relatively quiet?
Well, the high priest and his sons
Okay.
caused the people to sin.
So the priesthood was quite corrupt at that time, and they were not. They for the most part were not being good leaders in many ways. Why else?
There's a lot of wickedness, and people did what was right in their minds.
Okay, so we're coming off of that period of the judges, right? So Samuel is the last of the judges, the first of the prophets. He's sort of that transitional man of the last of the judges, the first of the prophets. So during that time of the judges, remember what was said over and over and over again, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. And that is a mess. When you do that, that is not at all how God intended for his people to be. And so there was a spiritual darkness that had sort of permeated the land of Israel. The people were not in a strong spiritual guiding sense. Now there was always a remnant, and we see, remember this is Samson is right about this time. The story of Ruth and Boaz is right about this time. So we do know that there was a remnant of faithfulness that stayed in Israel, but the bulk of the people were being led astray by the bulk of the priesthood who were not doing their job. So the leadership was leading them down the wrong pathway. And so God chose not to speak during that time. And so the word was very precious and rare until Samuel comes, and then we're going to see some big changes. All right, number 2. Eli was losing his physical eyesight. He was quite old by this time, yet it is interesting to note that this could represent something other than the obvious. This just ties in with what we're talking about. Can you give the secondary explanation of that?
He was also spiritually blind.
There you go. So it is kind of interesting to note that was a very important detail for God to put in there. It isn't critically important to know that he was physically blind to the story. It's not critically important. It's an interesting detail, and he's telling more about it. But it is critically important to know that there was a spiritual darkness that was permeating the land. And so when we tie that together, it seems to be all the more important. Okay, number 3, where was Samuel when the Lord first called him? Why would he be there? And why did he not recognize who was calling? Sherry?
They talk about he was sleeping near the ark of the God in the tabernacle of the Lord. And he was lying down. And it says Samuel did not yet know the Lord, nor the word of the Lord. The Lord had not yet revealed himself to Samuel.
Okay. All right, that's good. The first part of that, I want to stop just a little bit, because we did discuss the fact that many people read those verses and think that he was sleeping somewhere near the ark in the tabernacle. I think if you remember back to our Ezekiel study, you remember that there were places where the priesthood actually slept. We called them little apartments, little cubby holes where they could set up, say, maybe cots or whatever, and they would sleep in that area. It would not be common, nor would it be right for them to sleep near the Ark of the Covenant. It would not be common for them to sleep in the holy place or any of that. They would sleep in other quarters that would be on the temple, on the tabernacle compound. Remember, the temple's not there, it's the tabernacle. On that area where they would be sleeping, but not actually in those areas. And Marianne is frantically waving her finger.
Well, the way it reads, it just says, and before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord where the ark was.
Yes.
It's just a time thing. It's not a position.
Exactly. But a lot of commentaries do pick that up and make that, it just doesn't fit with how God ever really established the area where that was. So it appears to us that he's going to have some duties, right? Our little Samuel. And so what are some of the duties? Am I going ahead?
Yeah.
a little bit.
Well, it said he ministered to Eli.
Yes. Okay. And so he has certain things that he's going to have to do that are important. He's there. He's a little young priest, right? Doing priestly duties. Remember, he was consecrated from birth. He didn't have to wait until he was 30 to be consecrated in that whole area. He's in the process of training that. So he's near the tabernacle, doing priestly duties, and then you mentioned that he did not know the Lord because
The Lord had not yet revealed himself.
and so so that regenerate heart, he was doing duties, but he hadn't had that, we would call it that born again experience quite yet. So that's coming to him. So and the Lord had never spoken to him before, and so he didn't have that recognition. He did not yet know the voice of the Lord. Okay, number 4. What changes about the 4th time the Lord calls Samuel? Is this the first time you've seen this detail in Scripture? And what does it usually signify?
I didn't have the questions beforehand. So
Okay, Marianne?
Eli told him that it was the Lord calling and how to answer the Lord.
Okay. And what was different about that 4th time that we didn't see on the other 3?
He calls him twice. His
Twice. He doubles the name, doesn't he? He calls him Samuel, Samuel.
It was important.
And that is that a detail that you've seen before in Scripture?
Moses.
I gave you in your packet. You'll see there's a list of Abraham,
Jacob,
Moses.
Isaiah.
There's Mary when he's talking, even Jerusalem. There are multiple times. So what does that signify?
Ratcheting up.
Okay.
Something important about
Something important is going to happen, isn't it? And always when there's a double calling of a name, something changes. And so it's really interesting that the details that were written here is that he calls him Samuel the first 3, and in the 4th time he says Samuel, Samuel. And that's
Same
when
way when he says verily, verily, I
yes,
say.
very important when there's a duplication.
Listen
Always
to me.
always pay special attention when you see a duplication of that.
And also it says that the Lord came and stood.
Yes,
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
and talk to him.
Isn't that interesting?
As opposed to, that's what I was thinking,
Just calm.
audible voice before. Yeah, that's incredible.
Very, very interesting. So a very significant change. It's almost as if he knew that he was going to call him several times,
Well,
which he did.
But
That-
he would be face to face with the Lord then.
It would be, yes.
If he stood,
Yes,
and he was there.
Yes, we talked about that standing there, what that actually means. We know that this was a time when it was definitely God got his attention. All right, number 5.
What does it mean? I don't
Wouldn't you
remember.
call that a theophany? Or
There's multiple people. There's multiple ways of thinking of that. So some people call it a theophany, which is just Christ, in the form. Some people call it that. Other people say that the standing of the Lord before him simply means that the way that it's used in the Hebrew means that before the voice would have been an audible voice that would have been heard. But the standing of it means that they're in one place. It was obviously coming from there. So what it was for sure, we can't know exactly, except for that it was much more intense and it was much more important. And that the Lord was making himself known to Samuel. All right? So number 5, God says he's going to do something at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. Isn't that just, I think that's just amazing. What is he going to do that's going to make their ears tingle? Mom, this is your question.
Oh, the house of Eli will not be atoned, for there's no sacrifice there.
Okay, good. So he's going to eliminate basically the house of Eli. That's going to be an amazing thing that's going to happen. Is this the first time that he would or they would have heard this prophecy?
No.
No,
When did they hear it before?
We just had it in
Okay.
2 Samuel verses 31, 32, 33.
Good. So just the previous chapter, remember the man of God came to him and told Eli what it was and prophesied what it was going to be. So this is just a repeat. They had already heard this, but God wanted to be sure
So God
that they
said it
knew.
twice?
God said it twice. Can you believe? So the line, the family line of Eli, there was some really strong judgment that was going to occur. I didn't ask the questions for it, but not only is the line going to be taken away, going to be eliminated, but also anyone who's left behind. What were some of the things that would happen to anyone left behind? Die young, die in the flower of their age. Right, and that it would cause great grief. In other words, things that began to happen to them would cause great grief to the family because they were not going to have an easy life. So the judgment was negative all the way around. There was nothing positive that was going to happen there. All right, let's see. Number 6, Eli will bear the judgment for several sins. Can you name why he's bearing the judgment?
Is this the fact that he did not discipline his sons?
Okay, he did not discipline his sons. And so there's several reasons. Anyone, you have another one, or is that the only one you wrote? Okay, anyone have anything else?
Didn't he partake of the meat that his sons took also?
It doesn't, we don't know that for sure, but we do know this. He was complicit.
Yeah, he was complicit.
In it. And so God is judging him just as if he did eat all of that food and all of the fat. He was complicit in the sin. Anyone have anything else?
Sleeping with temple women or whoever.
Well, that his sons did that, and so that was.
Well, he knew it, he was complicit, but he didn't discipline them. In fact, their punishment should have been stoning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so
And God said that Eli honored his sons more than
yes,
he did God.
and that was very, very clear that that God said, why do you honor your sons more than you honor me? God isn't going to stand for that. How many times did we read in Exodus that God is a jealous God? He is number one on a list of one. And that anything else falls below that. And so he said, why are you honoring your sons more than...
They were vile, and he didn't even address it with them.
Right.
He just,
Well, he said
well,
something,
he
but
did
didn't
say,
do
yeah,
anything.
that's what I'm saying. I mean, he didn't say, stop it today.
Yeah.
He let them just continue on there.
So Eli had a twofold role with his sons. He was their father, but they are adults. It's not like, it's not like they were children under necessarily his guidance, but he was their father. But secondarily, he was what?
High priest.
He was the high priest, and they were priests, and in that light, they should have been treated just like any other priest. And we can go back to the example of Aaron with his 2 sons who brought the strange fire in and were immediately killed, and God said, don't mourn or even act like you see this. We're just going to carry the bodies off, and you continue on with what it is that we're doing. Because when you are the high priest, you now have a deeper obligation than just your family or anyone that you know or your friends. You are now representing God to the people, and so you have an obligation to that. And what's really telling in this chapter is it said that Eli knew what his sons had done. Yes. So and the people had come to him and had told him what his sons were doing. So we don't know for sure how long this has been going on, but it's been going on. People have come to him and told him, and when the people came to him and told him, he didn't stop it. And so because of that, he's now complicit, and this judgment that he's reaping is going to be horrible. Now, the 2 sons, how about their judgment? Pretty bad, right? Because so they are going to be punished for it. But I feel like Eli's punishment is an even stronger punishment, because he's looking at all of the descendants and what could have been and what will be. And so why would that be? let's just say he didn't do any of those things. Let's say he didn't eat the meat and we don't hear anything about him sleeping with the women or doing any of that. Why is he paying the higher price? Okay, he is the high priest. We've established that. But but why?
The line, the lineage.
Okay, and to those who are given much authority, much is expected, right? And so
They're under a different set of rules.
it is really very clear here that that's exactly true, that God has a higher expectation for what it is that's going to happen there. And so Eli is going to bear, he's not going to have that immediate killing of immediately, but he is going to have an even stronger one with his familiar line. All right, number 7. Samuel is afraid to tell Eli what the Lord has said. How does Eli get the information from Samuel, and how does he respond? Okay, Cindy?
I put he begs and threatens.
Okay, there you go.
Eli says, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him."
Okay, that's what Eli ends up saying to Samuel. So Samuel doesn't immediately go to him and say, Eli, here's what the Lord has told me. It says he was afraid to tell Eli, and we talked last week about why did we say he's probably afraid?
Because he has to tell him terrible things.
Yeah.
Bad news. And does he love Eli? Probably.
Yeah.
I'm sure. There's a great affection there.
He's with him all the time.
Right, and so the bad news is coming, and it was really bad news, and he didn't want to have to go and give that to Eli. Perhaps he was afraid of what might happen. Eli's an old man. Eli's 98 years old. He's an old man, and so he didn't want to have to go to him. So in turn, Eli comes to Samuel, and he does what? What did you
He
say?
begs. He begs and threatens.
Pretty much threatens. He says, "Well,
God
may."
do so to you and more if you don't tell me.
Yeah, it sounds kind of harsh, doesn't it? But I'm thinking that maybe it wasn't quite as harsh as it sounds to our ears. It was more like, this is really important. I need to know. This has to be told to me right away. So Eli recognizes that God coming to the boy Samuel is very important. He realizes that he is the high priest and God didn't come to him. He didn't hear the voice of the Lord. God didn't come and talk to him. God came through Samuel, and so he wants to know what it is. That's important to kind of get a feel for because of his response. We need to explain that. Yes?
I can't help but think too, the relationship they had and what was going on there, that was part of his training. That Eli knew that it was the Lord calling Samuel.
I'm sure he recognized immediately that he was attempting to call him.
So if he was to perform in that prophetic gift, then he had to be able to speak forth what
That's right.
God had given him.
That's right. Exactly. And he's young, and this is his first experience, right? And so it's establishing that ministry. So he tells him, "You have to tell me," and then he just responds, "It's God," saying it. Let him do whatever he thinks it's right. Yeah, and so he recognizes that. So number 8, all of this establishes Samuel as a true prophet. Okay, a true prophet. So this is going to be really important. How else does the Lord make himself known to Samuel?
Through his word.
There you go. Say that louder.
Through his word.
Through his word. It says through the word of the Lord, right? Made himself known. That immediately took me to Paul. To the Apostle Paul, and I printed it off just so that I would have it here with us, because when I was thinking about that, the Lord made himself known through his word to Samuel. Reminds me of in Galatians 1, when you guys go home, you might want to look this up, when Paul is called by God in very much the same way. And he says in verse 11 of Galatians 1, he says, "I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ."
You know, it says he went to Arabia for 3 years. I think he might have gone to Sinai.
For you have heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. Here you go. But when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, my immediate response was not to consult with any human being. I did not go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was, but I went into Arabia. And later I returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Peter and stayed with him 15 days. So, a lot of people miss this in that Paul receives his teaching of Jesus Christ through revelation, through direct revelation from Jesus Christ, who comes to him. Marianne made a good point of it. Likely while he was in Arabia. Many people say perhaps Sinai. We don't know that, but that's where God spoke before to Moses. And so it would be an interesting tie-in there. But he went into Arabia and received direct revelation.
Which would make him an apostle.
Which would make him an apostle because you would need to know Jesus Christ. He doesn't go down to Peter. He doesn't go down to the apostles. He doesn't talk to them. Why? Because he's getting taught a completely different thing. When I say completely different, I mean it's the same gospel, but now it's going out to the Gentiles. He needs to let loose of the baggage that he had, and God needs to speak directly to him. And then, after a period of time, 3 years, then he goes and meets. But at that point, he's already set. He's already taught. God has spoken to him and revealed it to him. So when I read that little piece of Samuel, that the Lord made himself known to Samuel through his word, it immediately made me think about Paul, because that is how God reveals himself to people, right? Through the teaching there. And why does this occur in Shiloh?
That's where the tabernacle is.
The tabernacle is there.
And the priesthood.
The priesthood is there. The Ark of the Covenant is there. Exactly. All the important things are in Shiloh at this point. And so it's important. That's where God meets with Samuel.
What is the reference for Paul?
Galatians, the 1st chapter. Start with verse 11 and go down.
Can I ask, or
Yes.
something, I thought your notes